Hey guys, Garrett here, and today I want to give you the realities of living in an ICF house. 4 years ago, I started my ICF home build project, built it myself. Took me 2 years to do it. Pretty good size house. And then December of 2018, we finally moved in. So I've been in this house for a little over 2 years at this point. And I'll be the first to say ICF is just awesome. So let's talk about some of the best things about an ICF house, and I'll give you some of the challenges along the way. If you're like me, then you're probably building this ICF house so that you can save money over time. You're spending the money up front wisely. It's an investment to save money for the lifetime that you live there. And that was the main reason that we built that ICF house. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is efficiency. My house has 3,000 square feet of conditioned space on the main floor as well as in the basement. So there's 6,000 total conditioned square feet, which means that a typical house would take a lot of energy to heat and cool. I am in Kansas, so it gets hot during the summer and it gets cold during the winter. We see it all. So my goal for this house was to keep those ongoing bills as low as absolutely possible. So I built with ICF. I have a 5 kilowatt solar system attached to the house, as well as I used 2 ground source heat pumps to heat and cool my house. So everything was about efficiency and longevity. Well, after 2 years of living here, I can tell you I am all electric, and our average monthly electric bill, if you average the entire year, is $100 per month. Now, take into fact that, again, is the only bill that we have coming in. So $100 a month is what it takes to keep the lights on and just live normally. And that's with keeping the summertime temperatures between 75 and 76 degrees, as well as the wintertime temperatures between 67 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. About $100 a month, that is awesome in my opinion, and I think it's actually going to get a little bit better, because if you saw from one of my previous videos where I was talking about attic insulation, I actually found that I was deficient up there, so I'm going to add 5 more inches of insulation up there, as well as here before too long I'm going to hook up the de-superheater to my hot water tank in my basement so that we can actually dump that heat that would normally go to the earth into my hot water heater. Between those two things, that should bring our average down a little bit. In the future, I will make another video showing before and after differences whenever it comes to the bills. But I'm going to have to gather quite a bit of data to do it, so it's probably going to be a good year away. I became aware that the ICFs were going to be really efficient kind of early on. As I was building, I finally got everything framed in. I got all the wiring in, all the plumbing, just basically everything that was going to be in my walls, and I was ready for sheetrock. I got all of that up. All the drywall was hung, and as soon as it was hung, I shot in all of the insulation within my attic. And the reason I did that was I wanted to put in a window unit because my geothermal systems were not yet hooked up to anything. So I wanted at least a little bit of a conditioned space that I could work inside of the house. Well, the sheetrock, it was all put up in May, and at that point the temperatures were averaging in the upper 80s. That particular year it was actually a hotter May than what it typically is. So it was hitting the upper 80s to even the low 90s. So I stuck this 8,000 BTU unit in just one window, and I only had the one, so I stuck it in the main living space because I figured that's the biggest area, and then maybe some of that can feed off. Well, I was shocked. I ran it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it kept the temperature very consistent throughout the entire house at 76 to 77 degrees. And I was blown away by this. My sheetrockers were so happy too, because they could do all of the mudding and finishing that they needed to do, and they were typically used to doing it in unconditioned spaces. And even this tiny little window unit in this big old house was able to sort of keep up. It could not pull out the moisture that they were putting into the air at the time, but it kept the temperature down. So yeah, we had higher humidity levels, but the temperature was a lot lower. And so it was a lot more comfortable. They got done, and then I left it there until I finally got the geothermal systems going. Well, we know ICF is efficient, but what else is awesome about it? Well, you get 4-hour fire protection. And while that sounds great and it's great for peace of mind, what you have to remember also is there's a savings involved with it. with your insurance. Let them know that you built an ICF, a concrete ICF house, and you will get a discount most likely on your premium. ICF homes are also considered legacy homes. So you are building with 100+ year lifespan of that home. So it's going to be around a long time after you're gone. And during that time, you're probably going to have less maintenance because of the way that it is constructed. Another benefit is this sound reduction in the house. An ICF wall has an STC rating of 54, meaning if you were outside of that wall and you were shouting, you shouldn't be able to hear it on the inside. And I'm here to tell you that's partially correct. That would be for a wall that is in a perfectly sound controlled space, and that's just taking into account that wall. That is not taking into account the windows or the doors or the roof. Those are the areas where your sound is going to come in. So yes, it is going to be a quieter home than what a typical home would be, but it's only going to be as good as your windows and your doors are, as well as however it is that you insulate your roof. So can I hear my kids yelling whenever they're outside playing by themselves? Absolutely. It's because I can hear them through the windows. Do they sound as loud to me as if I was in a traditional home? Heck no, probably half the amount of sound coming through. This also comes into play when storms come by. Storms are definitely going to be quieter than in a traditional home, but you're still going to hear the storm. You're still going to hear the wind howling because, again, they're hitting those windows, and that window is not nearly as sound absorbent as those walls are. However, because of the construction of the ICF house, how strong it actually is, those winds that come through, and trust me, Kansas has insane winds come through. I don't have very many trees around my property, and those that I do have are still really small. So we have no protection, and I built the house quite a ways up in the earth. So it sticks up relative to everything around it. So we just get straight line winds all the time coming through, and they hit us directly. With that said, the only way that we hear it and notice it is because of the windows, but it's still a lot quieter than what a traditional house would be. And if you watched my free land video, I subdivided this lot into 2 lots, sold the house in the front, of which we lived in for 4 years. So we had the exact same conditions there, and it was a 2x6 constructed home, and it was a lot noisier there than it was in our ICF house. If you've lived in a stick-framed house for any period of time, when a strong wind comes through, your house is creaking and it's moving a little bit. That does not happen with my ICF house. So we get no creaking noises like we used to. Another advantage to ICF is the consistency throughout the house of the temperature. There are far fewer drafts through the house because the house is a lot tighter. There are much fewer cold spots in the house. You're going to be surprised at just how consistent the temperature is room by room by room by room. And that was one of the big takeaways with that window unit that I was talking about in the house, is every room was really consistent. And I was so surprised that that window unit could just keep the consistency of the temperature throughout the entire house. I thought the main living room was going to be so much cooler than what every other room was in the house, because that's how every other house I've ever been in was. It wasn't. It was consistent. It was within 1 to 2 degrees of that main living area. One of the realities of living in an ICF house is that things do expand and contract, and when that happens, it actually can make noise. So I'll notice, especially in my basement, just because of how I made my window bucks, that as the sun comes around and hits that west wall where all of my windows are actually set against the foam that then has a screw that goes through that then contacts the window buck, which is sandwiched in between those 2 layers of ICF foam. Well, that vinyl will expand and contract at a different rate than that foam will. So actually, when I'm in my basement, the sun comes around, you'll actually hear little poppings and just crackles of noise as that expansion and contraction happens. It's not a big deal. It's completely and totally normal. It's just a reality of living in an ICF home. Another reality is the humidity issue in the early days of your ICF house. When you live there to start with, it's going to be fairly humid in that house. This is a very common thing. I've talked to a bunch of ICF installers, and they all said exactly the same thing. The fact that those ICF blocks cure that concrete slow. They keep the humidity very high in that column of concrete that it slowly starts to wick out, and it wicks into the living space. Well, because this is a slow process, it takes time for all of that to actually happen. And the result is you have higher humidity levels in your house the first 1 to 2 years of living there. But it does not persist. As time goes on, you're going to see those humidity levels drop and drop and drop. And not only that, but you're going to finally have to get to the point where you have to put humidifiers in place, especially during the winter, because everything's going to hit an equilibrium point. All the curing is done of the concrete, and you're just left with the normal conditions of your house. So don't worry, during those early days, it is very normal for the humidity levels to be higher. It does come down, and it will hit an equilibrium. The last reality of living in an ICF house that I can talk about is hanging things on the wall, and it is tricky. A lot of the stud finders are not going to be able to find those plastic studs. So you're going to have to do one of three things. You're either going to be drilling a bunch of pilot holes in and then covering it up with whatever picture it is, which that's not the way that I would suggest doing it. Number two, you're going to make a map of your house, and you're going to put some representative points on those ICF walls on that map of where known plastic strips are, so that you can measure off of that to know where everything is. The third option, which is probably the best, if you have a corner block in a particular room, you're going to know exactly where all of those plastic strips are. So you can measure off of that corner and you know exactly where everything is. Especially if you have a basement and you have utility rooms that are not sheetrocked in. You can look down at those walls and remember what the spacing is between all of those plastic strips, as well as, especially if you have a corner, you can just measure off of that and you know how to transpose that up to your main level. After living in an ICF house, I don't know that I could ever live in another house. It's just amazing how much noisier they are, especially when winds come through. And of course, all of the other benefits, including the efficiencies that I already talked about. You get very, very spoiled in an ICF house, and you will never look at another house the same way. So get out there, build yourself an ICF house. It's your forever home. Enjoy it. Enjoy saving money every single month. And if you're building it yourself, it's not that hard. Make sure to hit that like button down below, as well as subscribe. I'll see you guys next time.